WDET. I'm Stephen Henderson, and as always, thanks for tuning in. Actress Denise Nicholas was 19 in 1964 when she left home here in Michigan to join the Free Southern Theater in Mississippi and Louisiana. That was Freedom Summer, when voter registration volunteers were beaten, black homes were burned and bombed, and 4 civil rights workers were killed in Neshoba County, Mississippi. Nicholas joined the theater group to edit plays and to help use literary arts to start a dialogue among Southern African Americans about the struggle for freedom. Soon, though, she was on stage playing critical roles in poignant stories about civil rights. Her career since then has been around stage, television, the big screen, and then a turn toward writing, always focused on pushing the message of equality and justice. Nicholas will be honored during the annual Women's History Month Leadership in Action Awards charity tonight at the Rooster Tail Waterfront Entertainment Complex here in Detroit, Michigan. She joins us now to talk about her career and the power of words and ideas to influence change. Denise Nicholas, welcome to Detroit Today.
Thank
you. Great to see you.
Great to be back home.
Yeah. Well, let's start there. Let's start in 1964. You were a student at the University of Michigan. You're 19 years old, and you decide that what you want to do is go south to be part of the Free Southern Theater. Give us an idea of what was in your mind at that point, and I want to know what your parents thought about that decision.
Well, it wasn't a good day.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Well, there was a lot of activity on campus at University of Michigan at that time.
Yes.
And a lot of civil rights movement people were coming to campus to talk about what was going on in the South and also to convince other students to join the civil rights movement. And so I was affected by those speakers, as were quite a few other people on campus. Yeah. So I thought, well, how can I do this? How can I involve myself in a way that doesn't scare me half to death, but it also is kind of in the direction of the arts. Yeah. And that's when I found the Free Southern Theater. So I joined the Free Southern Theater, which was a part of SNCC, really.
Right.
So I went to Jackson, Mississippi. I was there for 2 years. The theater moved to New Orleans eventually, and we toured all over Mississippi and some places in Louisiana. It was an incredible 2 years that I wouldn't change for anything, including the bomb that exploded on the stage in Macomb.
I was going to say, I mean, this was you say that you were looking for a way to participate in this and maybe be safe, but that there was no guarantee of that if you were doing anything.
There was no safety anywhere in Mississippi at that time. There really wasn't. I think our experiences were so riveting and so profound that you carried the fear with you and you just dealt with it on a daily basis. For one night in Ruleville, Mississippi, I stayed in Fannie Lou Hamer's home when the theater toured to Ruleville. And we had to sleep on the floor because the Klan was shooting into the house. And that happened a lot. That happened a lot. In Holmes County, we got there to perform, and the community center had been burned down. So they were in the process of building a new community center. So we performed in a half-built community center. And it was beautiful. As hard as it was, seeing the awakening and the will of the people to make a change, just like these students now out on the streets demonstrating against all this gun violence. It's the same energy. I'm so heartened by these kids. I'm like, they're on TV and I'm just keep going, don't stop.
Wow. So what did your parents say when you said, hey, I'm going to leave school and I'm going to go be part of this movement in the South and I don't know what will happen to me? What was their reaction?
My mother was terrified. She didn't talk to me for a couple of years. She talked to me when I got to New York 2 years later. So my dad was more philosophical about it because he was a race man. I mean, he's a Detroit person, and he was a person who was in the race riot in Detroit in the 42 or 43?
43, yeah.
He had stories to tell. So he was afraid for me, but he understood. He absolutely understood.
I'm intrigued by your sort of instant identification with the kids who are protesting now. And it's a great sort of way to talk about the differences between what happened in the 60s, what's happening now, and the similarities. I'm always really interested in hearing people who were around for what happened in the 60s talk about what they see today, not just with kids and gun violence. Black Lives Matter is another, I think, echo of that time. Do you feel sometimes like we're going back to the 60s here in America?
Yes. Actually, I think we're going back to the 30s.
To the 30s, even further?
I don't think we're going to
right?
the 60s. Yeah, I think we're definitely in a retrograde kind of frame of mind in this country, and it's frightening to me because all the work, or most of the work that's been done to create at least the hope that we could reach a better place seems to be just pilfering away.
Yeah.
And so these kids coming now at this point, especially during this particular administration, that's what gives me hope. And it's not that the other organizations over the last 3 years have not, but the timing is what is so powerful to me. It's the timing. It's the shootings in Parkland and the way they talk about it, the way they speak about it. It reminds me of the Stokely Carmichaels and the other leaders of the civil rights movement who spoke so brilliantly about what was going on in the South and what we had to gain and what we had to lose if we kept sitting down and not standing up. Yeah. So these kids are standing up, and they're doing it with so much surety, so much strength. It's like, where did you come from? Who taught you this?
Right.
I mean, these are high school kids. And remember, most of the civil rights movement kids were college kids.
Right.
These are high school kids.
Right. Yeah.
And they're talking like they're like university kids. I'm listening to these kids. I'm going,
Where'd you get that, right?
Who are your teachers? Who are your parents? Yeah. They're just, they're beautiful. They are beautiful.
Yeah. I want to talk about a little about the Free Southern Theater and the concept behind it, which I think is really interesting. This notion of helping African Americans in the South sort of start a conversation amongst themselves about what was going on. You know, as somebody who, of course, appreciates writing and words and ideas and debate and discussion, I think it's a part of the civil rights movement that we don't hear nearly as much about, but was just as important as marching or sitting in or registering people to vote. The idea of conversation, the idea of debate about these things through theater. Tell me where that came from and what that was like.
Well, the original concept came from Gilbert Moses and John O'Neill, who were the founders. And Gil had studied, in France with a theater called, a theater run by Jean Villard, and it was a touring theater in France. And that's where he got the concept. He'd worked with him in France, came back. Gil went to Oberlin. So he wanted to be in the civil rights movement himself, and so this was his way, because he was a theater person.
Yeah.
So he set it up, he and John, and they asked for volunteers or people who could work for 2 cents a week, and we all came running. So
yeah, I'll do that. No problem,
sure,
right?
sure. Not thoughtful about retirement at all. Just kind of,
Right. I'm just gonna go do this.
Don't do this. So yeah, that was the idea, and it was. Let me give you an example. We did a play. We did things that were kind of pointedly aimed at what was going on. For example, at that time, In White America by Martin Duberman was the first play that we did. But later we started doing more experimental things, and we did Waiting for Godot. Well, that was, everybody's like, what is that?
Right.
Who is going to know what that is, and what does it have to do with anything black? Well, we didn't know, but we tried it. So we got, again, this is Ruleville. Fannie Lou Hamer was set to lead the discussion after the performance, and people were dumbfounded. In fact, I was dumbfounded, and I was working backstage on that one because there were no women in it. And so Mrs. Hamer stood up to lead the discussion. People were sitting there, and they're kind of looking perplexed. And she said, Waiting for Godot. Well, we know something about waiting, don't you? Everybody woke up. It was
Right?
like it was
Right.
a moment.
Here's the connection.
Here's the connection.
Right.
Here's the connection. So we fostered that kind of discussion, and that opened the discussion, and people had questions. Gogo and Dee Dee and the tree and the rope, the slave. People had absorbed it, the visual, even if the words weren't there to
Right.
really discuss it, but it started to come. And that's what happened almost after every single performance.
Wow. Denise, I want to talk about your later career after going south and then to New York, becoming an actress. You decided at some point that you wanted to be an author.
Yes.
So you walked away and wrote a book.
Wasn't quite that simple,
Yeah,
but
right?
yeah,
And
that's
make
the
it
end
sound
result.
like
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
Just go write a book.
Not quite.
Yeah. I mean, I read about the process that you went through to write your first book, and it's really remarkable. I mean, it's remarkable in the sense that I think it portrays, again, the struggle to do something that's art, but also extremely socially relevant. And the story you tell is very much sort of a reflection of the things that you had experienced up to that point.
I think from my experiences at University of Michigan, and particularly my experiences in the South, it created for me an eternal context. And the context for me as a Black woman in America is always going to be based in struggle, because we're so far from the finish line. So I don't think I could comfortably write without including that context,
Yeah.
because it shapes everything that I see and feel. I never let it go. I never let Mississippi go,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
I can't, because it's like a branding. And I knew pretty early on that experience would probably shape something about me for the rest of my life. That's how powerful it was.
That's very powerful imagery as well, that it's like a branding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. And you continue to write. You have a new play.
Yes,
That is,
this is my last civil rights movement.
Your last.
People are saying, "Will you get off the civil rights movement, Denise? Will you move on?"
Well, but
and I'm saying, "Move on to what?"
I was going to say it's more relevant now. It seems,
Exactly.
given what's going on. I mean, these are not
Exactly.
old stories.
No.
They're new again.
No, in fact, there's some people who are optioning Freshwater Road, my novel, for film, who say now to them the book is more relevant today than when it was first published in
Wow.
2005 and 6.
Wow.
So that's great. But the play is called Letters from Freedom Summer. Ricardo Kahn is the lead person on that project, and he brought me in after reading Freshwater Road. He wanted to adapt it to the stage. I said, no, let's do something fresh. So let's start from scratch and do a new piece, which we have done. And it opens at University of Missouri, Kansas City, the first week of May.
When I was just over the last couple of days, I was thinking about these bombings that are happening in
Texas.
in Texas, right? People just going out finding packages on their front stairs, and it blowing up. That does remind me, and I was not alive for the 60s, but it does remind me of the things I've read about that time, the volatility of that time. And I absolutely hear what you're saying, going back further. But the 60s seem to be revisiting us in some of the awfulness, I guess.
Yes, I think so. I think it's unleashed. I think the demons have been unleashed probably mostly by the current administration. I don't want to give it all there, but certainly there's a responsibility to bear. For example, I, as a fairly liberated woman, feel a certain nervousness about going into certain situations that I never felt nervous about previous to last year. And it's because I don't want to be confronted by the insanity that I see rising up in this country. Because I'm not a fighter. I can't beat somebody up, and I don't want to be beaten up, and I don't want to be spoken to in a way that's dismissive and angry and negative. So, and I know if I'm feeling that, other people are feeling it as well.
Yeah, a lot of people are. All right, Denise Nicholas, actress and social activist. Thanks very much for being here on Detroit Today.
Thanks.
It's going to do it for me. I'll be back tomorrow. I hope you will too. This is 101.9 WDET, Detroit's public radio station, community service of Wayne State University. We'll see you tomorrow.